Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to another Conversations with Amoda Maa. Hello, Amoda.
Hello, Kavi.
So it's been a while. It's been about a month. We've been away on retreat in the time since our last podcast, and we're still exulting in an absolutely exquisite retreat. And so now we're back and we're pressing on, and here we are doing another podcast. So today we've decided we're going to do a podcast called Reclaiming the Divine. Let me just read you a little bit of a rough outline that we've got and see where to go from here. In this episode, I'm going to speak with Amoda about how humanity has lost the inner connection with the divine and what it means to reclaim our divinity. We're going to touch on, explore, hopefully all of these points, if it works, the externalization of God in religion, the collective malaise of being disconnected from the divine, and how this plays itself out in relationships, society, and culture. Who or what is God? How can we reclaim our divinity, and what difference would it make in our lives? Can the human and divine be integrated in ordinary life? There's a lot to unpack here. Just to say, we're Amoda and I are both on the same page today. As I was out for my morning walk, the same thing came to me, and about how important this kind of question is, and so I'm looking forward to this exploration. Amoda, let's start. I think you had a kind of quote or a story that you were going to share, and maybe we can start from that point and just see where it goes. Yeah, see
Yes.
where the exploration goes.
Yes. So this is a short story that Osho used to tell, and it goes something like this. A long time ago, when God lived on the earth amongst the people, he was often asked to help to relieve their suffering. So he would be sent prayers and requests and so on. And as the population grew, so did the prayers and requests and the begging for salvation, the begging for relief from suffering. And so God decided to disappear, to hide, because there were too many prayers. And the people looked for him and couldn't see him. And when God was hiding or was looking for a place to hide, he asked a wise man, "Where should I go? Should I go into the forest and hide there?" The wise man said, "No, don't go to the forest, because the people will find you there. The forest is not far away." So he said, "Perhaps I should go to the mountains and hide in the caves." And the wise man said, "No, that's also not far enough. The people will find you there, and you will be hassled. You will be burdened by their incessant prayers." So God thought about it a bit more and said, "Well, maybe I should go to the highest peak of the Himalayas, and hide there." And the wise man shook his head. So then God pondered a little more. He said, "Oh, well, maybe I should go to the moon. They won't find me there." And the wise man said, "They will find you there too." "Well, what about the furthest stars?" God asked, and the wise man said, that too is too close for you. They will find you there. So God had a real deep contemplation and then realized, I know, I'll hide in the one place where they won't look for me. Right in their hearts. So there it is.
And that concludes today's podcast. Because in many ways that kind of says the metaphor or the talk of it, regardless of not its literality, but the metaphor speaks very deeply to what we're going to talk about today, right? The one place.
The one place where man, woman won't think to look, because God has been externalized. God has been externalized as an entity, a being of higher state of consciousness, omnipresent, omniscient, that lives somewhere far away. And all the images that we have is of God in the sky, God in heaven. So not only is it a sort of literal representation of God outside of ourselves, but it's also a kind of idolatry. Yeah? He, usually a he, sometimes a she, has become an idol to be worshipped or to be feared. And therein lies the disconnect. Pretty straightforward, really, and pretty simple in some ways to see. And yet it has pervaded religion of all forms and all traditions for so many thousands of years.
Is it I'm just thinking about those religions, because obviously the orthodoxy of those religions, let's say Catholicism, Christianity, let's just talk about those two. Uh, the more like what do they call the more fringe elements of those religions? What do they call the more esoteric? The more they tend to externalize God less. Is
I
that,
believe
am
so,
I
yes. I
right? I
mean, I'm
think
not an
so.
expert in theology, but
The Christian
my
mystics, for
understanding, yes,
instance.
the what's it called? It's
Yeah.
like the perennial wisdom within each tradition, which has become a religion, is at its core uh, the same as what we'll be exploring and pointing to, which is the realization of God within, whether it's the Christian Gnostics or I mean, I'm not a theologian, so, but that's my understanding, is that, yes, this sort of inner wisdom, the esoteric wisdom of each tradition, the Sufi, the Christian, and so on, is that it's just been lost. Now, we don't really need to go into why and how, but it's obvious that religion, as it's passed down through conventional, let's call it Christianity, conventional, any religion that we can mention, even in Buddhism, that can be an issue. It has become externalized.
It's almost like for the masses, it's externalized. And then at the higher levels of it, all the deeper wisdom realizations of it, that externalization is seen to be a little bit foggy, a little bit kind of not really true, but you have to be immersed in whatever tradition it is, to realize that actually that externalization is really about something else, quite frankly, which we're not going to explore
Yeah,
today.
I
But,
mean, there's
needless to say, it's about some element of like control or disempowerment of the masses. There is a historic political element to it. And as we're going to explore, because to put it in a nutshell, if you separate man or woman historically and contemporarily from their innate divinity, there's always going to be something wrong with them. There's always going to be a hole. There's always going to be a gap. There's always going to be a problem. And
yes,
therein lies the rub. Yeah.
yes, absolutely. And again, we're not particularly, that's not what we're positing here, because although that seems to be the case, but what we can deduce from that, whether it was something, if you like, planned, premeditated, or came about just because that's the way civilization developed, what we can say, and really the starting point that I would like for this conversation, is that because of collective, shall we call it, unconsciousness of true nature, for whatever reason, yeah, individuals, the majority of individuals, have forgotten true nature and identified with the separate self as an ego self, as a me self, and as a me self that's defined by race, by religion, by culture, by sex, by, I mean, gender, by the roles that we play in life. So the formation of the ego identity has become the disconnect from true nature, which is ultimately what divinity is. So even in, let's say, more spiritual or new age cultures, I still see and think there is often a disconnect, because the divine is not always, but often seen as something still outside, some higher power, some creator God, some creator entity, creator being or beings, ascended masters, and so on. That's still an externalization. And really, or some kind of, even some higher state of consciousness that needs to be achieved, that's still an externalization. So I think it plays itself out in many different ways, simply because of the mechanism of ego identification.
So you what are you saying? That over time, the ego identification, the strategy of the ego, has kind of taken over the human experience in a way, because it's filling the gap that innate divinity would, which is true nature, would fill. Would not fill is not the right word, but
I think the disconnect is the ignorance of true nature.
and ignorance of true nature is ignorance of God within.
I would say ignorance of true nature is believing you are the separate self, which is the ego identification. Ego, the many layers of ego identity. And then that disconnects, if you like. I don't know if that's the right word, but it is not in touch with, is not embodying its true nature, which we can call divine, although that very word is sometimes tricky. Yeah, but we're using that to refer to something that is more, let's call it the oneness, the one beingness that from which everything arises, including every single individual. That's our oneness. That's true nature. And the ignorance of that true nature takes place because of the identification with the ego identity. We feel separate, and in feeling separate, we feel different, we feel alienated, we feel either that we need to belong to a certain tribe or a certain belief system or a certain ideology, and those that don't belong to that are in opposition to that or are the enemy. So we have the divided world, the divided psyche, and the divided world, which creates all the problems, yeah, in the world and within ourselves. It's the root cause of suffering. So to know ourselves beyond ego identity is actually to know ourselves as the one beingness, which is God. Yeah, but not God that is outside as a separate being, but our true Godness. We can call it the divine wholeness from which we have arisen as individual entities.
Okay, so let's explore a little bit more about this thing like disconnection, about what it means. How does the disconnect from true nature or inner divinity? Let's just use that term. We know what we mean by it. How does that show up? Where does it show up in the in an individuation?
Well, I think it's accurate to say that it shows up everywhere, in every, in every.
This is true. This is very
right,
true.
in every relationship with life, every aspect of life. Let's start with the self, shall we? The relationship with the self, the disconnect arising from the ignorance of true nature. But we can also call it the forgetting of our innate wholeness, the forgetting of our innate godness. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I like it.
Yeah. The it shows up in the I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough. That's the fundamental one. We can take it to the extreme. I'm not worthy enough is the belief that I am a sinner.
That's right.
And I have to, yeah, we're back to religion, right?
We are back to religion. Yes.
We're trying to
Yes.
avoid religion, but we're back to religion. Yeah,
Well, yes,
I am.
because it's predated. Some religions, not all by any stretch, are whatever that word is. It focuses on the fact that by the very, hold on, we're going to get a crack of thunder, I think, by the very fact that you've sinned
That's
before
right.
you even arrive here. How insane can we get?
That is an affirmation of our non-divinity. You've already sinned before you were born.
Yeah.
Merely the fact that you are born makes you a sinner. Therefore, you have to adhere to certain rules, ethical rules, moral rules, belief-based rules, and so on. And there we have the problem of religion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it has. Can
fundamentalist.
I just want to interrupt with that, because even in that, there is an inherent truth. I don't want to cast all religion or any religion to the wolves and say it's a terrible thing, because actually, on a certain level, there's a sort of truth in it. There is a sort of truth in it when we give away or lose, the conditioning runs rampant through our lives. We feel less than, and sin is nothing more than to miss the mark. So have we sinned when we arrive? Well, we sinning becomes missing the mark, becomes the very thing that you're talking about. So,
Absolutely.
so I'm saying there is a truth in it,
There is a truth in every lie.
Yeah,
Yeah. And absolutely, and perhaps we can return to that, but suffice it to say that um, the distortion of that truth is what has created the major disconnect. Yeah, the mass disconnect, let's say, the mass forgetting, um, the mass belief that I am a separate self. um, yeah, so that's the relationship with the self, and then um, that is a problem because we suffer in that. We suffer in the belief that I'm not worthy, whether it's at the extreme end of believing I'm a sinner according to fundamentalist beliefs, or if it's a more subtle sense of unworthiness that is very common in almost all people, which causes us to strive in life, to look for love, to look for success, to look for recognition in order to feel more worthy, more complete. And therein lies the human condition. So the relationship with the self is a major reflection, yeah, of where we have sinned, where we have
yeah,
missed the mark. Yeah. And then, of course, that plays out in relationships with others. Yeah. That's where it goes next, the relationship with others, where in intimate relationships, it'll play itself out as needing the other to love us, needing the other to approve of us, needing the other to be a certain way in order for me to feel complete and happy and so on. And there we have codependency, the root of codependency. I need you to love me, and so on. Instead of knowing our true nature, knowing our innate wholeness and letting love, if you like, flow or shine from that, not from a place of need and transaction. And then, of course, shall I carry on?
oh yes, 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 you're on a roll, so let's keep going. Yeah,
I'm rolling through the human
experience. Yeah.
experience, and then we have the problem with others, not necessarily intimate relationships, but we can expand that into friendships, which is much the same, and family, which is much the same, really plays itself out there. And then with others in society, where it plays itself out as tribalism.
Yes, I thought
Yeah,
you were going to say
I
tribalism.
belong to this set of beliefs, whether it's political or I don't know, it could be anything, ideological or yeah, or I belong to this club, or I belong to this whatever it might be, and or this religion versus your religion, or this nation versus your nation, yeah, and so on, and there we have huge problems in the world of creating a divided world and creating enemies out of those who have different ideologies or beliefs. It becomes a problem, and it becomes a fight, it becomes opposition, it becomes who's right and who's wrong, and a lot of, I would say, unnecessary wasted energy goes into that. We call that the world. um, that's not necessarily the world, but it's the playing out of unconscious identities. Um,
God Almighty.
yes, and then we
Sorry,
have war, and then we have
I'll just
violence, and and so on.
One,
So
well,
this that we're speaking of.
one realizes the enormity of of what, the simple actual issue, which is the loss of God on the inside. Yeah. The lack of God really, truly on the inside, which means, like you were saying about tribalism and war, really, you know, if I haven't don't can't feel through direct experience my godness, God on the inside, then I feel a certain lack. But I don't want to feel a certain lack, so I'm going to project that outwards and create a tribe. And that tribe usually is fundamentalist in the sense that it believes strongly in a, let's say, in a God out there. But then it looks to the other and says, and you're not that, and you're not that. So it can't recognize the divinity in the other. Because if we all damn recognize the divinity in ourselves, ipso facto, truly, we'd have to recognize the divinity in the other. And if you
That's right.
recognize the divinity in yourself and the divinity of the other, the game is over, because we'd actually start to love each other instead of fear and hate each other. You could still believe in something, but it's not going to drive you to killing. Let's face it.
That's right. That's right. It's the it's sort of the ego identity, the separate self identity feeds on differences, feeds on righteousness, self righteousness, and other wrongtousness. It feeds on comparison and competition and all that goes with that, position taking. So the true sense of lack, the true sense of unworthiness, the true sense that there's something missing in me never gets addressed, because it's, like, as you said, it's projected outwards. Um, and therein lies the human condition. So it's powerful. It's powerful to reclaim our divinity in a way that is that is a return, if you like, or a remembrance or a true knowing of who and what we are, which means a true knowing of who and what everyone is and everything. There's nothing separate from it. It includes the other sentient beings, you know, the, the creatures of the world, the animals and the so on. It includes those. They are also not separate or excluded from this. To know that everything arises out of the one is a reclamation of our divinity. So it's powerful stuff to understand what the root of the problem is.
I think that we're in the times now, where the opportunity, I don't know, maybe it is the shifting of the ages, or maybe something else. Maybe it's just an evolutionary impulse, and we don't really talk about that. It's not our speciality, but there is an increased sense on many, many levels that this alienated way of moving around the world that results in all the strategies and the things that you were talking about is actually running its course and really hasn't got anywhere else to go apart from annihilation of each other, really. And that bifurcation point is over time is where we're at in so many ways. And so this awareness that we're speaking to here now, is actually a conversation that goes on in many different spiritual traditions, whether they're New Age or not. It doesn't really matter. It is a conversation that people are asking, what happened? What's happened that we could make that fundamental error so greatly that that God is hidden inside us, And we're searching around the world, you know, to try and fill a hole that isn't empty. Like, this is a big conversation. This is a big issue. This is not a peripheral spiritual conversation, really. This is a conversation that is right at the very heart of the human dilemma.
Yes, it's not just for spiritual seekers.
No,
It's for everyone who is asking the question, who is, however it's being expressed, yeah, and has the capacity to go within, perhaps through the doorway of the heart rather than the doorway of the mind, to, if you like, connect with an inner wholeness that is beyond any lack, beyond any circumstance, beyond any identity, to discover that who we think we are is not, is simply on the surface. It's simply a, a circumstantial situation, a circumstantial manifestation. And I think every human being has the capacity to at least touch on that in some ways.
can I ask you? So you just said, you know, not really, you know, you mentioned that the heart is, you know, it's almost implied that it's going to have to get involved somehow, because just on the level of mind, it actually, you know, extrapolating from what you said, it's going to stay on the level of belief, and that's the trouble. That's the trouble is, you know, that's running. So what does that mean for let's say for an individual? And let's go into the you know what does that mean for an individual to accept, let's say, or to accept the invitation that's being posited here? Yeah, that there's the writ large, generally speaking, we're alienated from our true nature, and we've replaced that absence with a whole set of beliefs and constructs with who we think we are, and we strategize our way around the world. But to actually realize our true inner divinity, or what you said earlier, I can't remember that phrase that you used, natural wholeness or something, you know, there's going to have to be a journey, because it can't stay simply on the level of belief. What was that?
Yeah, it is a journey. And excuse me, it's not one that can be, it's not a formulaic journey. It's a unique journey for each individual to look within and ask themselves, perhaps this is a sort of primary doorway, to ask themselves a question, something like, do I want peace? Or do I want suffering? Yeah. I would say that most people, if not all people, actually want peace. But the unconscious mechanisms and conditioning and layers of ego and identity hijack and distort the way that that peace is attempted to be found, and ends up as the opposite of that, which is to do with
Peace through war.
yeah, peace through my safety, through peace through my rightness, peace through upholding my beliefs, peace through protecting myself or defending myself. And I don't mean physically, I mean psychologically, and all of that. So it's very distorted and hijacked. But if we look within, if we ask ourselves, or if an individual is ready or willing, or to really go within and ask the question, then it sort of opens the door to the possibility of seeing within and within one's life how, let's call it, tight-fistedness is suffering. Arguing with what is suffering. Arguing with anything is suffering. Arguing with oneself is suffering. And that sort of opens the door to the possibility of at least being willing to find out within oneself what the unclenched fist feels like, and what that reveals as a new way of being, which is wholeness, which is goodness, which is love. I mean, it is a journey with many different aspects to it.
I think it what I hear you saying is that there is a kind of multi-layeredness to it. You sort of discover one layer of your resistance, or one layer of your fight, or one layer of the clenchedness, and manage somehow, through whatever way presents itself, or you find, then you find another layer, and yet another layer, because we are multi-layered over in many ways, until we get to the clear light of unity or union. I like the word union, until that kind of somehow arises, which is entirely natural. Entirely natural. It's like what is not natural within us? Well, it's the mind mechanism that's running the entire show. So yes, I agree. Yeah.
And of course, if I may say, we do this in the way that is possible for us through our work, through our teaching. Yeah. I mean, there are many ways. That's why it's not formulaic. So
Yeah.
I don't think we're positing some
Oh.
formula or solution for humanity. I can't speak for each individual. Yeah. So we're being quite generic
Oh,
there.
why
But
not? Come
the
on.
way that it takes place, which is the only way that we know, and what's possible, is to support that journey and that inner discovery of true nature, of true wholeness, of true goodness, of what actually is enough, what actually isn't tainted by not enoughness, that collapses in a division between being worthy and unworthy. That's what we do. And we speak to that. That's what I speak to. So on that level, we are supporting the knowing of God through the discovery of the wholeness and the ever-present nature of beingness, which is where we actually meet each other, at a deeper level that is beyond personality and beyond beliefs and beyond culture and beyond anything that we can define ourselves as. And that,
we touched this, I mean, we didn't just touch it. We bathed in this at the retreat, to be honest. And it was a revelation in some ways for some people, but actually entirely natural. And that was the feedback, was like, oh, this feels so natural and yet exquisite at the same time, to actually feel it within oneself, direct experience, and then to recognize it in another, because it's not precious to the individual. And everybody was, people were having that kind of experience. And that's not to say this is the way, because there are so many different ways, but it is to say that there has to be an unveiling,
Yes, it's
which
an
is what you
unveiling of the
talked
self.
about before. It's an
Absolutely.
unveiling of the self. And you see that through this unveiling, what's left. And you realize that, we turned God into a series of belief systems that take you further away from one's innateness. This is the trick of the world. And then you realize, well, how do I find God? I was asked this on a session that I did yesterday. I'm looking for God, and I was stumped because all I could say was, well, you are God. What are you looking for? It's a realization. It's not a search external
Well,
to us.
one of the problems is that uh, God has become an idea, even in spiritual circles, of perfection. Therefore, I can't be God because I'm not perfect, says the individual. Yeah, I'm a
Says the ego,
personality, a
yeah, says the
personhood with, with my, with my tendencies, and my life isn't perfect. So how can I be God? Because God has an image of perfection. Yeah. Whatever that looks like. Everything works out fine. It's all of a higher order. It's all perfect. It goes according to my wishes. Yeah, and so on. So this creates a disconnect too. And so only awakening out of the dream of self, of me identity, can we discover what the true meaning of God is, of godness, of our innate godness, our innate divinity, which has nothing to do. It is perfection on some level, in that there's nothing's a problem in this. Yeah, it doesn't need anything added to. It doesn't need anything taken away from it in order to make it perfect. But it's not perfection according to the mind's idea of perfection. But it does change the way we are with ourselves, with each other, with the world, with life. And it changes the 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 suffering of drama and trauma and poor me and victim identity into being at one with life, which brings trust in life, however, whatever the circumstances, yeah, which we can't control. But it does put us in a, if you like, in a finer, yeah, vibrational field. Yeah. And that does
yes.
have an impact on our relationship with ourselves and our relationship with everything and all of life. That's what I call divinity. It's not divinity in the sense of being a light being and being, perfect and having superpowers or having a perfect life or any of that. It's very human, but it's human on a whole other level of wholeness than what we see collectively, or what we see even individually in our own lives prior to awakening to true nature. Yeah, so it's powerful, but yeah, each person has to go on their own journey with it, and yeah.
I think, it's some of just picking up on what some of what you said is the idea of innocence, for instance, because I believe, the idea of innocence, not the idea of innocence, but innocence, yeah, is inherent in what you're talking about. It's actually not something that can be lost. It's something that is inherent to us. It is our divinity, it is our God nature, you know, and it is covered over through the issues of, wounding and trauma and belief systems, and, and that's goes straight to the heart of what you're talking about with the imperfection. Yeah, the imperfection of us, and we believe that, and that's reinforced by religions, and
Mm-hmm.
reinforced by, culture, and reinforced by all these things. And yet, some of the most powerful poems, for instance, that I've written point directly to the fact that despite the fact that you might feel unworthy, despite the fact that you might feel imperfect, despite the fact that you might feel flawed, when you really take apart those beliefs, what do you find underneath them? You find union, you find wholeness, you find innocence, you find worthiness that has nothing to do with ego, nothing to do with being taken away or added to. That's kind of what you're talking about. And therein lies a great revelation, I think.
Mm. Yes, and that speaks to the same as looking for God externally. The looking, if we bring it right into the individual experience, looking for perfection externally, we could say that the personhood, the personality, the body mind system, the way it looks, the way it acts, the way it, whatever tendencies it has, is actually on the surface. Yeah, it's the vehicle, if you like, or the vessel. And looking for perfection in that is the wrong direction. They're still looking outwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. How can I fix myself? How can I heal myself? How can I perfect myself? How can I be a better person, or whatever it might be? And actually, the call, the necessity is always to go in and in and in and in to the place where there is no person. Yeah, to the inner space, which is really the inner space of awareness, the inner space of consciousness, because that's where it is. That is the light. That is the divinity. And so it really is a going within deeper and deeper. As Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is within.
Within. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also, I mean, it's been said many times. It's like, the Rumi poem that I can't remember, but it's like, going out, searching for the gold. I think even Gangaji talked about it. Somebody, like the gold runner going around the world, searching for gold, and eventually got so exhausted they went home, and it was in their back garden. That's the metaphor.
Yeah. The
Is
treasure
is
is
like
always
it
here.
was always within. It's like
Yeah.
I'm knocking from the inside, and that is a powerful realization to realize. And some of this is just inevitable. You do search the world until the world points you within because you've run out of options, and that's what Osho was
That's right.
pointing to in a way. You're
Yes.
going to
Yeah.
search in the Himalayas. That's okay. You're going to search on top of the mountain, and by the time Elon Musk gets us to Mars, we're going to search on Mars, and there's not going to be a God there. And eventually we're going to get so tired of it that we're going to go in and say, oh, no.
Sure.
I
Yes,
mean,
that's it.
yeah. The metaphor that speaks to me to a certain extent in that as well as being, the metaphor of being banished from the garden is holds some of that imagery. As soon as we ate from the tree of knowledge, yeah, and we got lost in thought, we got lost in emotion, we got lost in guilt, we got lost in shame, and we were banished from the garden, kind of thing. And we have to atone for our sins, and we have to wander the earth, desperately looking for that which we feel that we've lost. But in many ways, that we didn't leave the garden. It was a thought. It was an error of thought, which is sin.
Mm,
It's there is no garden that we've actually left. Union is right here, right now, right?
mm. Yes. Yes.
Well, what I think in conclusion with this conversation is I'll invite you to, just to offer something, yeah, some something that people can use, yeah, some way in that might be useful to people, yeah, on their individual journey.
Okay. Yes. It's something that is very simple and accessible. to every individual that really yearns for peace, really yearns, whether they call it divinity or God or anything else, just the simplicity of peace, which is our innate wholeness. The peace that can only be found within. That's where it starts. Not looking for it externally in circumstances or belief systems or whatever, or actions, but really going within, which is the only place it can start, is to have a moment, a practice, let's say, of a moment or a few moments during the day. And it's good to perhaps decide what those moments are. I would say either on awakening in the morning, although sometimes that can be a busy time, but just before you go to sleep, even just before going to bed, or when you're in bed, before you actually go to sleep, before you lie down completely, or even when you're lying down, to have some moments of doing nothing. No reading, no cell phones, no iPads, really doing nothing. I mean, just for 5 minutes is a beginning. 5 minutes of doing nothing, being still, being quiet. We don't even have to formalize it as meditation. Forget about meditation. Just be quiet, be still. I used to offer this to my mother because she was very agitated. And
She did respond to it.
she responded. She was very agitated in her mind. She was constantly doing and worried and anxious. And she knew that I was meditating at the time for many years. And she wanted to do what I did, but it was out of reach for her. And I taught her, or maybe not taught her, but I showed her the way to just sit and do nothing. And she responded. And there was such peace in her that, it was like, wow. She said, is this it? Is this what it is? And that was very moving and touching to me.
Yes.
So I know it's accessible even in the most agitated mind. Just for a few minutes, that's all it is. To connect maybe with the breath, to just bring attention to the rise and fall of the breath and do nothing. Do nothing. Just be still, be quiet. And for a moment, peace will reveal itself. If you recognize, the problem is that that gets overlooked. Oh, well, that isn't anything. It's not even recognized as the doorway to that which we're speaking of, which is peace, which is goodness, which is inner wholeness. But if you recognize it as that and really honor it and sense its true nourishment, even for those few moments or one moment, that opens the door. And so it's very nourishing to the whole being. The body will be nourished by that. The emotional body, the physical body, the mental body, the soul will be nourished by that. This is the beginning of just going within. This is the beginning of peace. And if you want to take it further, then set yourself several times in the day. That's more valuable than trying to sit in meditation if you're not familiar with that, for 40 minutes or whatever. Just a few moments in the morning, at noon, in the afternoon. Just set yourself a time. Literally a few minutes. That's all it takes. It's like finding the space within, recognizing the space within.
I
It's
think
wonderful.
left to our own devices, so to speak, it's actually quite hard to get to that, which is why we've sort of formalized it into meditation. But I think what you're talking to is almost like we've talked about this before, a kind of prayerfulness without any prayer. Yeah, that silent kind of, going within. It doesn't have to be anything. No piousness, no belief, no striving, no struggle, but simply the invitation, like you say, to rest. It's a deep
It's
rest,
rest.
isn't
It's
it?
deep rest. And what are
Yeah.
we resting in? We're resting in the silence. We're resting in the stillness. We're resting in the wholeness and completeness of this eternal moment, which is God. That's Godness.
That's right. Yeah. So that's the invitation to court that. In my language, one can court that. One
Invite
courts
it.
yeah,
Yeah,
court
you
it.
invite it.
Invite it in. Yeah. Okay. I think that's a beautiful place to end the podcast for today. And so thank you very much for listening. Um, share this, please, if you're moved to do it. Thank you so much, Amoda. We'll see you again as soon as we can for another episode of Conversations with Amoda Maa. And until then, namaste.
Namaste.